Tokyo Dark is quite the depressingly thrilling ride. It has all the perfect makings of a horror classic, mixing the best of Japanese ghost stories and detective drama together. Throw in some humor that actually made me laugh quite hard, and a cast of genuinely interesting, likable, and relatable characters set to the backdrop of a recreation of Tokyo's darker side, and you have yourself one heck of a point-and-click visual novel. The story follows Detective Ito of the Tokyo Police Force. Starting the game hot on the trails of a case involving her missing partner, we quickly learn that not everything is all that right in our poor heroine's head. Via flashbacks of her receiving a terrifying doll-like mask and having paranoia-induced episodes, we learn of the death of a girl who somehow still lives and the insanity slowly enveloping Ito's life. After Ito's partner and lover by the name of Kazuki is killed at the hands of a deranged phantom of a girl, Ito is discharged and let off the force, and decides to go rogue as a near vigilante-like private eye. Wanting to piece together what is truly going on and put a stop to the horrid curse plaguing her, Ito travels all over Tokyo, meeting a cast of colorful characters whose lives end up falling into her hands. But like any good ghost story, the farther into the twisting web that Ito and those who follow her get, the more sinister and supernatural things turn out to be, more than they already were. Honestly, that's about all I want to say about the story, as I really don't want to spoil anything to come. There is a lot that is best left unknown, especially if any of what I just said interests you. Going in blind like I did is definitely a plus, and I will be trying to keep this review as spoiler-free as possible. However, I should let you all know that Tokyo Dark is a very sad game. There is no denying that. It touches on some incredibly hard-to-stomach subject matter in the story, and it definitely won't be to everyone's tastes. But with that said, it's all handled extremely maturely, and never feels like it's done just for shock or edge value. The writing for the game is absolutely fantastic, and outside of one noticeable error with who the dialogue was supposed to belong to, there were no spelling mistakes or grammatical errors that I could notice outside of that. Every bit of dialogue felt extremely genuine. The joy, sadness, terror, anger, hatred, and love that the characters all expressed felt very real and didn't sound anything other than something you might actually hear someone say. Some dialogue had me laughing out loud, and other bits had me in tears, but nothing read or sounded bad in the slightest. Just super high quality all around. Also, the insane ramblings and begging of certain characters were incredibly uncomfortable and disturbing to read, genuinely wrenching at my heart. Detective Ito is an incredibly likable protagonist, even though you can shape her out to be a remorseless asshole if you so choose her to be. While you can definitely play around with her personality and actions in game, the Ito I chose to experience as a main character was someone I rooted for until the end. I really did like the fact that Ito's character and personality all changed and formed around how the player had her respond to situations. She could be kind, ruthless, cold-blooded, calculating, understanding, or whatever else the situation might or might not call for. It kept each encounter fresh, because while her usual demeanor was that of a good-hearted detective with some severe mental problems, that wasn't to say she couldn't do things that were downright evil all in the name of justice. Or perhaps she is doing it all for her own selfish end. Again, she is what you choose her to be. Filling out the supporting cast is a decently sized roster of truly interesting and fun side characters. From the down-on-his-luck bar owner by the name of Daizo, the bubbly and gossipy security officer by the name of Saki, or the gaggle of cursed misfits you meet in Akiba, to the more important characters such as the reserved shrine maiden Mai, they are all healthily varied and genuinely unique. What's even better is that even though they are essentially just pawns in Ito's life, they all have their own stories, tragedies, lives, and goals that Ito can aid them with by lending a shoulder, or she can cast them aside after she sees that their use has been completed. What's even better is that if you remember to check on those you helped, their stories, just like yours, can have a positive or negative conclusion. I was happy that I managed to get a good chunk of the positive outcomes for those I came across on my frantic journey across the darkly presented Tokyo. It was genuinely nice to see souls who had suffered get a new lease on life thanks to Ito's words or actions. Honestly, I fell in love with the characters and was genuinely saddened when anything bad happened to befall them. Finding out about people who essentially lost a part of themselves in the Akiba strip was a harsh reminder to never give up those things that we truly love, and everyone else was a hopeful look to the future. It was refreshing that the comic relief actually felt natural and completely based in reality. It's funny just how true to life all the characters were. I met and ran into quite a few people who were extremely close to everyone here. On the villain side of things, I'm just gonna say that the villain is all too human, and it's not exactly who or what you think it would be. Things shift around, and you'll come to find that some force is twisting the story to not be so black and white. Forces you think would be evil might just be that way due to circumstance, and others are that way because of nature. Tokyo Dark is essentially a combination of a visual novel with heavy inspiration from late 90s to early thousands point-and-click adventure games. While all the puzzles were typically fairly easy, there was actually a surprising amount of depth and player choice to each of them. For example, there's a part where someone is refusing to let you leave. You have the option of violence, but you are not forced into it. Instead, you have the option of leaving, and if you actually investigated a little bit, you would remember about an item that you could add to your inventory that you could give to them to cause them to let you through. There are plenty of options like this, and it keeps each encounter fresh, and everything you do actually has weight and feeling to it. Things could end horribly for Ido, or at least those she meets, or things could have a glimmer of hope if approached well. Rushing in guns blazing is rarely ever the answer, but sometimes it might just be. A nice mechanic in the game that only thankfully appeared a few times was the timer during certain options. I'm thankful for that because the few times it was used, it had actual weight to each of your choices and made you very carefully but also quickly decide what you must do. The rest of the gameplay is naturally just exploring the small but decent feeling environments, talking to people, clicking on things for descriptions, taking your medication, but not too often lest bad things happen to you, and trying to piece the story together with what the characters tell you. One thing I really loved was that there was no reverting back to your last decision or save. Once you decided something, that was final, and that choice you would have to live with for the rest of that playthrough. Your actions and guilt would stick with you until you finish that run of the game. Unlike a lot of other games, there is no going back, and your choices actually do matter here. I just wish that two of the major gameplay features were more featured, or mattered more at least. One was the fact that you had access to a map of Tokyo, which for a small part of the time was actually open to explore, but after exploring a few areas, it goes to being fairly darn linear again, save for a few important late game decisions. The other was the spin system. This was basically all your different stats in the game, and I never really saw or felt any of these things actually change too much in the game, regardless of how high or low they were. Outside of certain characters pointing out just how stressed Ido looked, your stress, anxiety, sanity, and all those other things didn't really ever come into play. Maybe they did with certain things Ido saw later in the game because of her sanity, but really I thought those might just be scripted. But maybe your sanity really does affect things. I'll have to see again on a different playthrough and try to balance out certain levels again. Visually, the game looked really nice and actually had a surprisingly unique look that somehow took an uncannily looking generic anime style and made it its very own. Each character you talked to had their very own portrait, and each character's look fit into a cliche. The purple-haired badass female detective, the bubbly next-door neighbor, the shrine girl, the ugly fat perverted bastard, the Akiba maids, the arcade girls, the Yakuza boss, the Yakuza thugs, and so many others felt and looked exactly how they should and you would expect them to, and everything surpassed that feeling of similarity that you might have felt from similar games because everyone was so unique. Another thing I really appreciated was just how many amazingly animated cutscenes there were. There was a good number of them and they all looked really nice. I love seeing all the different cutscenes because they gave the game a nice flair. It's amazing just how true to life a simple 2D side-scrolling perspective of certain areas from around Tokyo felt here. Each area felt distinct and like its own seedy part of the city. I smiled at just how close to life everything in the game felt and how recognizable they all were. The horror and gore on display was actually relatively reserved, and I appreciated this as the game actually took its time to build up dread and let the players get creeped out way before any scares happened. The gore was also used sparingly, only being used a couple major times throughout the game, but when these things were on screen, they hit hard indeed. While not common or used cheaply, there were definitely some jump scares in the game. The game, however, more often used dread and atmosphere to scare and creep the player out compared to basically saying boo, reserving those for the more supernatural moments of the game where they actually fit in. And I will admit that darn mask is flat out creepy, and there was one scare that wasn't even a jump scare, just an image slowly being burned into your brain, and it got me good. Each of the game's original songs were perfectly fitting. Some of them made my skin crawl until all I could feel was a disturbing chill. And others had me bobbing my head with a smile. Everything was just perfect. The background noises were also incredibly unsettling, combining the hustle and bustle of the city with otherworldly terrors and horrors of the shadows. The chatters and footsteps of people drew you in, and the subtle whistles of other things reminded you that you were always being watched by a far more powerful force. There were only a few times that Ido was actually voiced.
はじめまして。
But while it is odd that there were so few actual voices, the voice clips of Ido's voice actress sounded good and fit her perfectly. So outside me wishing there was more, I had no complaints on the voice acting department. And with all that said, goodness gracious did I love every minute I spent with Tokyo Dark. It's the perfect length for your first playthrough, clocking in around 4 hours and 30 minutes, with a subsequent 10 alternate endings in the New Game Plus mode, each ending different and requiring you to do different things. The story moves along at an incredibly brisk but well-paced speed, and everything and everyone feels like they got enough time to actually be characters that you feel like you get to know while the story is unfolding. Nothing goes unanswered, and while the endings are definitely all grim with some glimmers of light and hope, none of them feel out of place or truly disappointing. Tokyo Dark is everything I love from a visual novel wrapped up into an exciting, sad, and terrifyingly original package that I wholeheartedly recommend to anyone looking for a deep, heartbreaking story that will sink its teeth into you. As always, if you want to help support the channel, please consider sharing the video with a friend or checking out my Patreon linked in the description below. If you have any comments, questions, or recommendations, leave them down below as I read and reply to everything. Until next time, this is Thierry Williamson signing off until the next video. See ya guys!